Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Shadow and Sun Show. Today I'm going to be reviewing The Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K.Le Guin. I actually read all three books this last week, The Tombs of Atuan and The Farthest Shore, but I'm only going to go through the first one, mostly because there were little bits I wasn't really thrilled with in the second and third book. All in all, it was a great series, and I'm glad I read them. But the first book was fantastic and really, sucked me in. And it was a lot different than I remembered. Back when I read these about 20 years ago, I actually didn't finish the third book for whatever reason. Sometimes that happens. You find something else, or you leave your bookmark in there, and a week goes by, and you find something new. But this time, I read all three of them back to back. I didn't rush through it, and I was really happy that I did, because when you get older and you do like I'm doing and reread old books, you discover new things, and you can see things through the eyes of an older, wiser version of yourself. And this time around, I really could see why this book was a recommended book in the Dungeon Master's Guide for inspirational reading. I can really understand how parts of these books were, I want to say, incorporated into the idea of Dungeons and Dragons. There's a old folk tale or urban legend about how when Gary Gygax or Dave Arneson finished reading The Lord of the Rings, they were so unhappy that it was over that it inspired them to create Dungeons and Dragons. And that may not be true, but I could see how such a thing could have influenced them. I know I had a player who didn't play Dungeons and Dragons much, but as soon as I convinced him to read the entire Tolkien trilogy and The Hobbit, that he was practically in tears when it was over and wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons more than ever. And so I'm looking at books that inspired Dungeons and Dragons as opposed to books that were written after. So many books out right now were clearly influenced by Dungeons and Dragons, and I want to focus on the books that inspired Dungeons and Dragons. It's very easy to enjoy one of the newer books that are out there because you recognize magic items or people or places or dungeons or monsters even from Dungeons and Dragons, and that to me isn't where I want to go right now. I want to read the things that existed long before Dungeons and Dragons, or like this one. I think it was written a little bit maybe after Dungeons and Dragons, or it was written right before Dungeons and Dragons came out, and it wasn't influenced by Dungeons and Dragons. It's too easy, I think, to write a book geared toward Dungeons and Dragons players and suck them in, and they're instantly going to like it. But it took so much more originality and creativity, I think, back in the early days of fantasy and science fiction, to be completely original and unique, and go where other books didn't go, like Conan and Elric. Maybe I'm not sure exactly when that was written, but some of the really older books that I've gone over, Robin Hood especially, there was no Dungeons and Dragons to inspire them, and this book really, it's called A Wizard of Earthsea. It is about a wizard, a young boy who becomes a wizard, but he wasn't your typical frail, D4 hit point, could only use a staff or a dagger kind of, individual with low stats except intelligence. He was, I want to say he was pretty close to being, more or less a ranger or a druid. He was a hardy individual. He definitely had more than 4 hit points at the beginning of the book. Definitely more than, I would say, 10. He was a tough guy who lived off the wild, and a lot kind of reminded me of the original Merlin, not the one that we all know with the pointy hat and you know the Disney esque version, or some of the more modern versions of Merlin. Merlin, was more or less a man of the wilderness, more of a druid in a lot of ways, but I'm getting off topic. Sparrowhawk, or Ged as his true name is in this book, was was so much different than your typical wizard in Dungeons and Dragons, and I really liked that idea where he wasn't frail, he wasn't very weak at all. He was a tough guy, and went through some tough times, and you know it was really eye opening and fresh for me. I had forgotten most of what I'd read, like I said, a long time ago, and I really would like you guys to think about that going through your book collection. Especially if you haven't read a book in 10 years. I think that's a great indicator. At least 10 years. If you haven't read the book in that long, pick it up and look at it with I want to say new eyes, but really that's not the case because we're all getting older. But with a new perspective, with your own life experiences to color what you're reading and see how it can inspire you when you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, or better yet, if you're a dungeon master, so that you can bring these old ideas into your new games for your newer players, or your new campaigns, or your new adventures, or even as a player, you know instead of so much of the stereotypical Dungeons and Dragons tropes that are so prevalent in this game and in this hobby, to maybe see things from an older, wiser perspective. So many of the stories that I hear about, and the characters, and from the last 10 or 20 years of Dungeons and Dragons have really turned me off from wanting anything to do with the newer products. I really like the not necessarily the old school revival products and new bandwagon that people are jumping onto, but more of the people who've been at it for a long time and really haven't changed much. I do want to see new players and new gamers come in to the fold and enjoy this wonderful hobby, but getting inspiration from the people who inspired it, I think are are lost on certain aspects of this hobby, and I just hope that you guys will take that in mind when you read your next book, and do go out there and find an old, smelly, beat up copy of a story that you've never read, or that you've read a dozen times before, or maybe just once before. Give it another chance. See what you think, and go ahead and throw your comments in the comment section on what you're reading. If you've got any recommendations for us, because I'm trying to get the little guy to read, if not read, listen to some of the old original stories that are getting kind of hard to find these days. But if you've got them in your collection, break something out. Let me know about it. Tell us what's your favorite story of all time, that sort of thing. Or like I said, if there's something you can recommend that I haven't covered yet and you'd like to hear my 2 cents on it, you never know. I might not have read it, and I might owe you one if you turn me on to something that I haven't touched upon. I've got a few more books left for for this month and the next month, but after that, looking at more D&D stuff, and kind of running out of the books that I've read. So if you guys got any recommendations, suggestions, I'd love to hear them. Until next time, we will see you tomorrow with a very cool craft, and then I'll have another Arduin review. But before I go, make sure you guys check out Tenkar's Tavern tonight. George DeRosa is going to be the special guest, and I am looking forward to it, because it's going to be all Arduin for at least a wonderful hour. And I hope to see you guys there in the chat. Until next time, we love you guys, and we'll see you real soon. Bye.